Trustee. Trustee Listener,
Here.
trustee Mealopoulos, trustee Underdunk here, trustee Rubin, trustee Scott. President Rowan, here, we have a quorum.
Pursuant to the village board's recently adopted public comment rules, because the village board's regular meeting is scheduled for the same night as the committee of the whole, public comment will occur only during the village board meeting, which begins at 7 p.m. this evening. If you have a comment on the agenda item that's included in tonight's committee of the whole agenda, which is our preservation report, I'll request that those comments be provided when we reach that item on the agenda. At the appropriate time, all comments related to the agenda items are limited to 3 minutes, and I'll notify the speaker when their time is up. So that takes us to the agenda, review and discussion of the Preservation Commission's annual report. And I'll ask our Preservation Commission's chair, Peter Van Vechten, and our staff liaison, Taylor Baxter, to present. Gentlemen.
Sure. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone had the opportunity to read the report that was sent. The presentation, which is advancing on its own right now, is at somewhat of a high level, so I just want to make some large points and move on. The commission has 7 members. Erica Black is a rep, works for the Village of Wilmette and supports the Preservation Commission there. Mitch Carroll is here behind me. He is an attorney specializing in real estate. Deborah Lammers is also here this evening, and she and her husband have had personal experience restoring a property in France. Jessica Mavrogenis has a degree in preservation, and she's during working hours has worked on some historic properties, overseeing the management of those. Dudley Underdunk is, as you know, a village trustee, but he's also an urban planner. Diane Schwarzbach is a real estate agent, and I am an architect. Not listed is a longtime resident and architect, Scott Jabor, who provides advice to the committee. I want to start at a very high level and just talk a minute about values. We all love living in Glencoe for a variety of reasons. The access to nature, the school system, the park system, the openness of the village governance, I've noticed here, is quite fantastic. But it's also a sense of place that you don't see in many other communities. And I believe it's quite unique. And part of it is, in fact, the built environment around us. The architecture plays a big role in that. And for a village of about 3,000 houses, it really has an astonishing amount of work by very, very famous architects, world famous. And those gems are all around us. And whether you notice them on a daily basis or not, they contribute to the feeling of Glencoe. So where are we today? We have 12 certified landmarks in the village. I'm sorry, I need to look at this with my glasses on. Okay, we have 74 honorary landmarks, 215 historically significant properties, all of which add up to about 10% of the total number of single-family homes in the community, about 10% total. Now, certified landmarks and honorary landmarks were part of the, when the committee was formed, the ordinance had these 2 levels, and it's had that for this entire time. Certified is the higher level, and in essence, that means you can't really tear the house down. But it is also the only one that has an economic incentive attached to it. If you invest at least 25% of the assessed value of the property in the home, you can then apply to the state of Illinois for a property tax assessment freeze. When the ordinance was originally passed, that was both at the honorary level and the certified level. That changed in 2013, so it's only at the certified level. Okay. So in essence, the honorary status is like a good pat on the back. There is no real economic incentive to do that. The historically significant structures are those that would meet the criteria to become a landmark, but for whatever reason have not taken the steps to do that. Possibly because there isn't incentives, possibly they don't want to do that. But we have identified those that still have a lot of architectural and historic value. So this graph represents demolitions over time since the Preservation Commission was founded back in 1990. Since that time, about 29% of the entire housing stock has been replaced. We're coming close to 1/3. And you can see that there's kind of waves of activity. Those tend to run with the economic cycles in the country. So for example, the valley that's just to the right of middle, that was during the 2008 crisis, financial crisis. Okay, makes sense. Nobody's doing much of anything. But as you notice, it picked up quickly and then it started to trail off recently. But as of this year, it's starting to bump back up again. Okay, so I'm anticipating the trend will continue back up, but each year is a little different. Last year, there was 1 landmark demolished and 4 significant homes demolished. This year, at the beginning of the year, there were 6 demolitions pending, but 2 have actually been already torn down. The one in the upper right and on the bottom, the one in the middle. So those are already gone, and there are 4 that we keep track of that are on the pending list. The one on the lower left is the Weebold estate, and that will be torn down. Okay. So let's move on. What have we been up to? The commission recently assisted the homeowner of 255 Hazel in preparation of their submittal for certified landmark status in the village. The commission also assisted them with communications with the State Historic Preservation Office to make sure that their project would meet the state's standards, because they're very interested in doing that. So in that case, that incentive really moved the needle for them to become certified. The property on the right, 80 Estate, was landmarked a couple years ago. We assisted them quite a bit in that process, but over the last year or so, we helped them give some advice in terms of modifications that they were proposing to make sure that they were historically appropriate, energy efficient, that sort of thing. Okay. About a year or 2 ago, the computer software for the story map had sunsetted, the one that was on the village website. And so the commission worked with the village. I'm not sure if she's staff or
One of our consultants.
thank you, the consultant, to update it with new software, which is actually a little better software. It allows, when you look at the story map, to see by color code which are the certified landmarks, which are red, the honoraries, which are blue, and the significance, which are black. So if you click on one of those dots, it will zoom into that property and it'll give you a little bit of basic information about each one. In addition, you can search by the architect's name, what style you're interested in, and then those will pop up on the map, or even when it was built. In addition to that, what we discovered, interestingly, there was some data errors in the first edition, so those have been updated to be a little more factually correct. The commission has also started an effort of public outreach in the media through Facebook, the village's the website, but also their Instagram account. And you might recognize this from the most recent issue of Inside Glencoe. The gentleman in the parade is sitting right over here. That's not why I bring it up. On the right, the first article announcing as part of Preservation Month in May, There's going to be each month a kind of a fun exercise. Do you recognize what this is? It's a visual. And the whole idea is to get people to kind of look at see what you are looking at. And so the initial one are 5 cupolas throughout the village. And if you notice, they're all in a Georgian style, which is kind of interesting because all the municipal buildings have this kind of commonality about them. So a quiz for this evening. Which cupola is on the building we're currently sitting in? 5, 4, 3, 2. Okay. So of those 5, any guesses? I'll give you a clue. It's not the one at the far left and it's not the one on the far right. In the interest of time, it's the one second to the right. But the next time you're walking around town, take a look at some of the interesting details. This is a really rich place. So the idea on this will be, the answers will be revealed each week. And then we'll move on to different things. In all cases, it's not a single family house. So all the examples are something other than that. The homeowners won't feel concerned. The commission also worked with the Evanston Bicycle Club to formulate a series of rides through the community that highlights some of the architectural gems. And this one is the mid-century modern center. I believe there's 2 rides like this. There's one about Frank Lloyd Wright. There's one just in general. There's one tailored more for children. This is live on their website. The commission has also been working with village staff on some more detailed kind of things. These happen to be the Frank Lloyd Wright markers. If you notice in the pictures, they are suffering right now. There's a lot of spalling going on. And it's not a new condition when you look at the historic photograph, but it is a concerning condition for something that these are Glencoe landmarks. And they are irreplaceable. There was work done on them about 10 years ago, which is frankly not working. And so the commission provided a number of options for consultants who would be qualified to do a good in-depth study on this. Apologize. Detail Lab is chosen. They wrote a very detailed report consisting of chemicals, what's going on. Fundamentally, water is causing a problem here. And whether it gets trapped inside and can't get out, or whether it's merging in, merging out, there's a lot of subtleties what's going on. The next step on this is that the commission will review this and make some recommendations to the village about next steps. Yeah, I believe there is still some money in the budget to move forward on this, but there's going to be a need for a lot more money when the work actually commences. Okay, the commission was also very delighted to participate in the formulation of the comprehensive plan that was recently adopted. As you might recognize, the plan is organized around a series of quote big ideas. Number 1, big idea 1 was build on Glencoe's character. And it gets back to where I started this discussion about the significance of the built environment about Glencoe. And part of that statement is Glencoe's historic elements and natural resources are to be preserved, and a new development should be compatible with the community's character and standards for design. And what caught my eye was one of the residents quotes, the historic and charming character of Glencoe should be preserved and strengthened. So I know this was a long running process, but we were delighted to be a part of it. Okay, current activities. When recent architectural surveys were conducted, they tended to focus on buildings that were a little older. And what we're currently working on is focusing on mid-century modern. And we've defined that as the period kind of from 1940 to about 1970, plus minus. And so we are taking a look at a high level of these. Glencoe has hundreds of these. And so we're in process, but the goal here is to find which ones are the real gems and then add those into the significant list and perhaps another tab on the story map. We continue our research into neighboring communities. What are they doing to support and enhance preservation? What are their ordinances say? We're continuing that is kind of a common thing, constant thing. We've had discussions with the library about their master plan and specifically the relationship between the library and Village Hall. It's my understanding that when Village Hall was built, which was after the library, there was an agreement that the two buildings would talk nicely to each other and that the space in between is great value. And so what we tried to communicate to them were those aspects and values that whatever they do, they need to be cognizant of that. We've continued to refine the recommendations that we put forward in almost a couple of years ago that encourage preservation and discourage demolition. So our goals moving forward. We would like to have formal consideration by this of the commission's recommendations by this board of trustees. It's been out there for almost a couple of years. We'd like to talk about it some more and then take some action, either yes or no. We would desire to become a stronger resource for homeowners, to expand the community awareness of the benefits of preservation, and to promote education and engagement of the public to maintain this community character that we have. So if it's okay, I would like to run through the recommendations.
Absolutely.
Thank you. This slide is a little difficult to read, but it's the 6 on one page. And what I'd like to do is maybe walk through each one briefly. There's much more detail in the report.
You have detail also before you get to the story.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's just walk through one by one. As a preservation incentive, reduce the permit fees for exterior restorations, renovations, additions, and alterations of certified and honorary landmarks. Now, what would be the economic impact of such a move? Look, over the last 5 years, there have been almost 400 permits issued by the village for that type of work. Doesn't include the new construction. And it does, when a historic house gets removed, it's not in this number. So that there were 3 certified landmark permits and 3 honorary landmark permits. So in reality, this is, in my view, this is not a discussion about the economics of it because they're very small when you compare it to the totals. What it does do is incentivize someone to become a landmark. And if you thought about this as perhaps there's a sliding scale, for example, if the certified landmarks had a 60% reduction in what the standard fee would be, and the honorary landmarks, so maybe it's a 25% reduction, something that recognizes it but doesn't zero it out. It could take the form of a rebate rather than just a reduced payment, so that you can verify that the work that was done conforms to what was agreed to. That's number one. Number 2, consider a property tax rebate policy to encourage certified landmark designation. So this proposal is only for the certified level, the top one. And the idea is create a 50% tax rebate of their property tax that goes to the municipality, goes straight to Glencoe. So, you know, on our property taxes, there's that long list of nickel and dimes and some real money. And there's a number for Glencoe. Underneath, or for the landmarks last year, that total was $54,000. That was all, that was the portion paid to Glencoe by the 12 landmarks. So an average of about $4,500 per property. So the idea here is not a total rebate, but roughly half, $2,000 over a period of 8 years. And that as being half of what you pay the village, that has a real impact. And the reason we like this idea is that not every certified landmark will invest 25% of their property value to apply for an economic incentive to the state, because that's a big number. So this would be something that could be an economic incentive to boost somebody into that level. Lake Bluff currently has this program. That's where these precedents come from. Number 3. Create a little bit more nuanced zoning approach affecting the existing structures for restorations, additions, and alterations versus totally demolish and rebuild. And the concept here is to create, yes, the zoning code has some flexibility built in today. But frankly, landmarks can be a little quirky because they can be old and not conform to today's standards, or they could have been pretty big. And we hear over and over that people would like to live in the back of their house. For 100 years ago, everybody lived in the front of their house. So the idea of a big family room or a great room at the back of their house is an idea that we've heard before. And by thinking about floor area bonus or lot coverage, all this gets tied together. And I recognize that this is a complicated recommendation, but what I'm asking, the commission is asking, is open the door to this concept and we can get it refined. But the idea is that there's a little more flexibility for the landmarks. Again, it's to promote preservation. So somebody could put a great room in the back of their house and move demolishing it because I want that great room. That becomes an option. What happened? Oh, yeah. Okay. The next one I would hope is straightforward. The current ordinance lays out a great deal what certified landmarks need to do for when they apply for a building permit or almost anything. It's very, very detailed. Honorary landmarks don't say a word. There's nothing about submissions. Yet the ordinance does state that the commission is tasked with performing an advisory review of any proposed changes. And so it's kind of a difficult thing. What we have been doing is taking the information that comes in through the building permit process, but oftentimes that's just not enough. So what we're suggesting, and again, the drawings of the existing and proposed conditions often are what are. You would think this would be straightforward, so that everyone has an idea of what's the purpose, looking at it holistically. they seek the commission's ideas and recommendations. Builders, in the years I've been on this commission, 2 times. So these are important for this, and it would include those demolitions. Now, the last one, no, sorry, number 5, not the last, almost there. Extend the village's demolition permit delay time from the current 180 days to 360 days. From like 6 months to 12 months. Our neighbors all have much longer demolition delay times than we do. They're all in that world. The whole concept behind this is to allow a conversation about alternatives to demolition for the landmarks. The Booth Cottage, the Frank Lloyd Booth Cottage took 230 days. It was not fast, but many of us in this room participated in that process. And there was a lot of discussions. But it worked. And so time can be an ally here. A small point, it would be great to have an automatic notice of a demolition application of a landmark to the village board, if staff could do that. Okay, now is the last one. Require attendance at the advisory review meeting for honorary landmarks. It's already required for certified landmarks. As I just mentioned, builders don't show up except 2 times out of the hundreds we've looked at. It could be the owner or the owner's rep. But the idea is, it seems only fair that they should be represented. They're asking to tear down something that has been judged to be of value to this village, so why not come to a meeting and talk about it? Okay, with that, I will turn it back over to Taylor. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about it.
I have nothing else to say.
So thank you for the presentation. Thank you for this work. Thanks to the Preservation Commission for all of this work. This is challenging. And so, let me, I'll start the discussion about why the subject is challenging, and then maybe we can figure out how to proceed. The recommendations, thoughtful. Some will be, I would think, could maybe sail through. Some of them are more complicated, might not sail through, and a lot of this, there's a question of, okay, what's actually going to work? But let me start with this. So this is actually, today is the 40th anniversary of me starting on the village board. There was a gap 40 years ago. And about 5 years into that, we did historic preservation. And there were differing views on the village board. By the way, I think there still are some differing views on the village board. And the big issue, I mean, everybody, sort of as a theory, everybody was okay with preservation. The big issue was how much were we willing to get in the face of somebody that wanted to do something to their property. And there was a strain in the village that said, it's none of our business. If somebody owns a property and they want to do something with it and it fits the zoning, they get to do it. And that it would potentially cost a lot of money if we started interfering with that. The ordinance that was created, which has certified and honorary landmarks, really respects that, maybe to a fault, because it basically says certified is volunteers. It takes basically two things. First, the experts, and that's the Preservation Commission, have to agree, okay, this is worth saving. But the second thing is the owner has to say, I'm in. Honorary, as I understand the idea, the Preservation Commission experts has looked and said, this is worth saving, and the owner has not participated. So, and that idea was designed to, respect property rights. Back when this was done, I remember one of the residents, a guy named Dennis Carlton, who's a business school economics professor. And he made a boatload of money in something called Lexicon, which was done by some people at the University of Chicago Law School. And he had a lot of money, and he had a nice house on Sheridan Road, and he came in and he said, cut it out. If I want to do something with my house, I get to. I mentioned Dennis Carlton, and that mostly carried the day. I mentioned Dennis Carlton because his new house on Lakewood, he had moved somewhere in the 40 years or 35 years. It was just in the Tribune because he just left town and he sold the house for $9.2 million, which is the largest price. And they said that the house was done by an important architect. It may have been new when he built it, but that's been 30 years. So it doesn't fall within your time frame as to what you're looking at, but architecturally significant. And the implication was going to be bulldozed. But and I sort of thought, well, what would Dennis Carlton think about that? And I guess the answer is he wanted the 9.2 million, and he was going to get that because and he'd be totally happy with this because the free market has worked and he's gotten his money. So, and the real question is, okay, we look at each of these changes, how much are they going to say to the Dennis Carl? I don't want to pick on him, he's a smart guy, he's done well for himself, but how much are we going to say, okay, you don't get 9.2, you get less because we want to preserve your house. And that's, we don't ever talk, we're talking about this now. We don't talk otherwise because it violates the Open Meetings Act. But I will speak for Gary Rubin, who's not here. He said his daughter's graduation. And he is really negative on the stick. He's okay with carrots if we can afford them, but he's really negative, probably more negative than I am on stick. As an example, I'm pretty sympathetic because I looked and I saw that our neighbors have done it, or some of our neighbors have done it, on extending the time period for demolition of not every house, but the ones that have been identified as historically or architecturally significant by our Preservation Commission. Gary, not so much. He would say, you do that, you're costing somebody money. And who are we to do that? I don't know what this group thinks about that, but that's the issue. And on top of that, there's a question about, okay, how effective is this change going to be? Because there are plenty of builders or maybe owners who would say, yeah, I can wait them out. It'll cost me some dough, but I can wait them out and I'll do it. I'd be happy to walk through each of the suggestions, recommendations, and we can talk about, how it goes. And like I said, I think I would be okay with saying, yeah, if a year is okay in Kenilworth and a year is okay in Highland Park, and I don't know exactly what you're saying about Winnetka, where it's like it's 270, but it's really 330. You have to explain that, but we can have a waiting period for identified property. By the way, I don't think it's appropriate for property where it's not been identified. I just, I've heard from residents, some residents who said, look, tear downs are bad, we shouldn't allow them. Or one resident met with me, made some thoughtful presentation. One of the things she said to me was, anything built 1970 or before is historically and architecturally significant. And I think, no, it's not. It isn't. I lived in one of those houses. It's been bulldozed. It was perfectly nice little ranch, but if we're talking about identified by the Historic Preservation Commission, the experts, I would say, okay, we can extend the time period. That seems okay to me. I think it's fine to require people to come in and get jawboned. They might not like it, but okay, that's not that terrible. I don't know, however, whether all the trustees would agree with that, and I'm gonna guess that Gary would not. And I'm not picking on him. I almost always agree with Gary on everything. So this is a place where we've diverged, but I understand the point. It's really the Dennis Carlton point. And that's a real point. And in Dennis Carlton's case, he came to us, he made his pitch, and it was worth $9.2 million when he left town. So that's a serious point. We have to take that seriously. Okay. With that, maybe a good way to talk about this, instead of being theoretical, is to go through each of the points, the recommendations, and see what the trustees think about that one. I think, and all I'm trying to do is suggest what we're thinking about to decide what to do about it, which is, okay, how rough are we riding on the residents' rights? Got to consider that, and we'll vary. What's the likelihood it's going to work? And that fits into how much we can, lean on somebody's rights. And in the case of the carrots, okay, is that likely to work? And can the village afford it? And I'm here to tell you, we just had our finance committee meeting, so we talk about, we're doing the best we can, but we have these pension obligations, and the state is threatening to make it worse. And the state just got rid of the grocery tax, and we're going to have to put ours in, which we're going to do later tonight, because we are a relatively wealthy community, but we don't have any businesses to lean on. So we actually need our pennies. We need our pennies, and so we actually have to think about it. And that's why, okay, how much is this going to cost us, and how likely is it to work and getting somebody to preserve the historic or architecturally significant building? Anybody want to weigh in before we look at the specifics? Or let's look at the specific recommendations. And I think maybe somebody thinks something else, but I think we should apply the sort of rubric that I've laid out for what makes sense.
Cost versus efficacy.
Cost, efficacy, and cost to the village, but also cost to the resident. Because none of this is ever going to be simple. By the way, I think I would be sympathetic. It's not simple, but I'd be sympathetic to tweaking how we do zoning variations for historically or architecturally significant properties. But one of the cardinal principles of our zoning is, okay, what about the neighbors? And if a neighbor, and one of the things that we've been doing at the zoning board is, if the neighbors don't complain, then usually you can get your variance, because if they don't care, why do we, it's within the variance limits. Okay, so we have a new regime that says you can get maybe more of a variance if you have a not so much certified honorary, designated landmark. Well, what if the neighbor comes in and says, yeah, I get the point, but I do not want that thing next to my house? or that close to my house, and everybody else in the village gets to have this setback, but you're saying because my neighbor has something significant, I don't.
Not paying attention.
Uh,
No, that's,
So we're gonna have. We could adopt the variance provision. But in the actual event of what happens, people go before the zoning board and then the zoning board's gonna have to decide. All right, enough of me. Let's look at you in order. Let's look at your recommendations and let's hear what people have to say. And Peter, if you or your committee want to weigh in on how you think these these suggestions fit, tell us.
Okay. So feel free to jump in. And there is more detail in the write-up than there is in the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
My eyes work better at that scale anyway, but.
how do you wanna,
I think anybody wants to talk.
Oh,
is
okay.
So, yeah,
Let's
so
start.
let's start with number one, the permit fee incentive.
Okay.
Both Hinsdale and Lake Bluff have programs. For this idea.
is there any, data, like how long have they been doing it and how long, and how successful have they been?
I think Hinsdale's been doing it for a couple, 3 years. I'm not sure how long Lake Bluff has been doing it. I know that Glencoe village staff was going to reach out to Hinsdale to ask that, but it's certainly worth. Did you guys have an opportunity?
We had a conversation with Hinsdale probably a year ago.
Okay,
I'd have to,
yeah,
I mean, how successful has it been?
It feels
I
pretty
don't think
measurable.
I don't think we signaled that particular one out, singled that one out when we talked to them, but we could follow up with them and get their sense of whether they think it's preserving homes, how much it's costing, those more specific questions.
the real. I knew this would come down to economics.
In part,
That's why
that's our,
it's part of your job.
that's
Part.
it is
It's an important part.
It is a
but
big
it's
part of our job. Yep.
There are a lot of other values that people have too. That's why I took the time to go back and look at how many were actually pulled. 3 over 5 years. So whatever that number is going to be, it's not going to be a big number. And where this really came to a head was at 255 Hazel. The one that just became a landmark. And he was talking about how much he had to pay in permit fees. And it was kind of an eye-opening discussion because his permit fees were about the same for an addition and some interior modifications. About the same as what a brand new house would be on the same lot. You go, hang on, what's happening here? So my point there is if you take 3, and if you take 50% of that 3, it's not going to be a huge number and it's applied over 5 years. So I don't mean to not address the question. I think it should be addressed. But my sense is it's not going to be an enormous number. And so what I'd like to do is to talk about this. Let's get the data because I believe it's the correct thing to do. But let's talk about this also is, will this make any difference? Let's talk about, could it be an incentive? So I would, you know how I feel about it. I kind of want to hear what you're thinking.
So, but let me just throw out that we charge by the square foot for new construction because it's pretty straightforward to do that. There's no size way to do remodeling, it just doesn't. So we have a different way, which is based on cost. We're pretty similar to our neighbors in our approach. So it's complicated to try to fix it. And it doesn't, one of the things I heard was, gee, it costs the same to do a new construction as an addition, in terms of fees, and well, okay, but it's really complicated there's no way we can make it the same, because we can't use for remodeling and additions the same thing that we do for new construction. Is this suggestion a suggestion only for identified properties?
Yes.
Okay, so that, and by the way, my guess is it'll be hard to tell whether this works.
Yeah.
I mean, you won't really know. I mean, has it worked? Why is it, as an example, the certified property, I mean, I'm grateful they agreed, and and I hope they get approval from the state and they get this property tax benefit, which the last couple of years would turn out to be huge.
Mhm.
People around this table, our property tax valuations went. So this could be a huge benefit. Would us doing this have made any difference? Well, in his case, apparently not, because they did it anyway. They were just aggravated. They had to pay us a bunch of money. But, I think we should get more, my view, we should get more information on this to see if this is a potentially sensible thing, because it might help. And we would have to satisfy ourselves that we can afford it and try to weigh that against whether it's likely to.
I just want to ask one question. So if something is an honorary landmark and they're doing this renovation work, are they required to then go before the preservation committee?
Not currently.
So they're not. So we're
The
talking
one is
about.
standalone, doesn't require it, but then they could be just a reduced fee.
Yeah, so I just wonder about giving this reduced fee when they could be totally cannibalizing their.
And we would have to say, obviously, if somebody's getting something from us, Gail's making a great point. If someone is getting something from us, we're gonna have to require something. But, usually it's the exterior of the house that looks significant, not always, I suppose, but usually. So if somebody satisfied, but in order to get this carrot from us, they would obviously have to show the Preservation Commission that when they're done doing what they're doing, this is still gonna be landmark worthy.
It's a great question, and it's one of the reasons why number 5 is there, require attendance.
Well, and that's of course for demolition, but.
No,
we were
it's
talking
also for
about-
it's for modifications too,
Oh, for
and
modifications.
renovations. Now, to be clear, the Preservation Commission only reviews exterior visible from the public way. So if you want to change the window in the back of your house to a Palladian window, have at it.
Unless there's a those elements have been designated like we did at that.
And
recent one.
yes, yeah,
ADSA,
Yeah. that's for an honorary land. For certified, it's a little more real.
But Gail has made what I think is a very excellent point, which is to the extent that anyone is looking for a carrot from the village, which, we may need to provide in order to get the saving historic or architecturally significant buildings, there needs to be some kind of, compliance. And with an honorary landmark, with a certified landmark, there's control sort of in perpetuity.
Right.
With an honorary landmark, to the extent we want control, it's gonna be every time somebody has to come in for a permit. And that's the time when we have a chance
Or
to,
an exterior.
Yeah.
If you want to remodel your bedroom and
Yeah.
do something,
okay,
have at it,
right, we don't care.
a new spa.
But yes, but Gail is right that any carrot. We have to have some kind of way to have compliance, and I'm gonna assume. It's not like you guys don't have other jobs and stuff, but I'll assume you're gonna be able to handle that load. And you think it's gonna be a relatively small load because there are relatively few of these. Okay, but
But if there are relatively few of them, how is that gonna stop this epidemic of tear downs in Glencoe? That's part of it for me, that like it's not responsive to the problem. If I live in an old home and you're not gonna find anyone more sympathetic about these things than I, and on a personal level. But by the time I got to the permit phase of my project, I had invested so much time and money. The fees were not, that was the least of it, it would have cost me as much to just shut everything down, right? So I wonder if that's effective, but I also wonder, given the very small number of historic and certified landmarks in Glencoe, if the concern is that we have this larger issue, it's just not addressing the specific, it's not responsive to the problem.
Yes and no,
That help me through it.
yeah. For many years, Glencoe has led the North Shore in the tear down rate. The percentage, not the total number, because we're small.
Okay.
But when you compare the total rate, it's been Glencoe's the highest rate for many years. I don't know what it was last year. It doesn't even matter. So you're correct. It's how would this affect the overall? Right now, you just saw the slides of how many landmarks are getting torn down. 1, 2, 3 a year. Boom, 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 boom. We're down to about 75, 74. It used to be twice as many. So somebody went through the effort to recognize their home. 2 owners later, Mr. Builder comes in, I can do better than this. And so what we're trying to do is these don't address the overall tear down issue. It's a bigger issue than what I'm here today and what we are here today for. I have some suggestions, but it's outside the topic.
is there a reason we should care about, I mean, I understand the statistic. I asked Taylor to get me some recent numbers. We're apparently at this, for the last several years, we're pretty much equivalent with Winnetka. There are fewer tear downs in Wilmette per capita. But I'm not sure why we care about how many tear downs there are. I get why we would care about how many tear downs of identified significant architecturally or historically significant buildings. I get that. The number of total tear downs, I'm not sure why I would care or why the village would care.
Well, in fairness, I raised that. They did not in this meeting.
No, I understand, but when Peter talked about the statistic of tear downs and where we're the leaders, that's all tear downs. That's not. And so we should, and I don't know how we fit. I mean, somewhere. So we have to figure that out too. We're not, I mean, we're right there with Winnetka right now. So the village that's close to being identical with Glencoe, it's right next door. It's just like us. It's 50% bigger. And their situation looks a lot like ours. Maybe theirs is bad and ours is equally bad. Maybe we're both okay. So in terms of a principle, it seems to me always got to be, okay, first and foremost, this property has been identified by the Preservation Commission as worth saving. And then we can look at other stuff.
And in many cases of the honorary landmarks, the majority, I believe, the owners agreed. So whenever it was landmarked, the owners were part of that process. There's only been
Certified,
honorary. Certified they must,
correct.
but honorary. is
I
a
understand what you're
choice.
saying.
And in the years I've been on the commission, I can only think of 2, maybe 3 properties that we landmarked honorary. There's an honorary landmark designation made without the owner's involvement. It's very rare.
But the current owner,
Right, until they
So,
want to.
until they wanna sell it.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
They're happy to have it while they're living in it.
Yeah.
They're totally happy, to, hey, I'm in this cool house, it's a landmark. And when they wanna sell it, the same folks are, and I get it, they're saying, yeah, get out of my face, I would like the most money for this property, and if it happens to be a builder who has his own demolition crew, okay with me, because I want the money. That's real life. And we have to consider that owner, Philistine, he may be, is entitled to.
Yeah.
To do that to a certain extent, but okay, I think. We should, I'm just sort of listening and folks have weighed in. We can. Let's do more work on how we would do it and what it would mean. Because I think the board, under certain circumstances, would absolutely entertain. Recommendation 1, assuming Gail's point that we're gonna enforce. That if they get a carrot from us, they're gonna have to, comply with the requirements.
Can I ask just a quick clarifying question too on this one? I know the 2 examples that are in the report are Lake Bluff and Hinsdale, that both look like they're full waiver of fees, if I'm reading that correctly, maybe I'm not. Are you?
I don't think Hinsdale's full waiver. Maybe it is.
Waiver of village fees for building permits, landmark
Yes.
or historic district designation applications.
It-
So
It
it's
could be a full.
probably close.
Okay.
It's probably close. So I guess the only question I have, and this is for staff, because we're gonna be supporting this research project. Is that the recommendation, or is there a spectrum? Meaning, less than 100% could also be a possibility.
I think so.
Or a cap or something.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
everything we consider. We are gonna be considering with the point of view, we don't have a lot of shekels to throw around, we just don't, we wish we did. But we do not have, we drive around the North Shore, we look at our neighbors and they have businesses. Shopping centers and they've got all this tax revenue and we don't have it. The only thing we have is the people sitting around this room, that's it. So, okay,
I have just one thing, maybe to Phil's point, if we do this, what kind of an administrative, impact would it have us? To actually evaluate these projects and verify that they are completely done, is that something staff would do, or the preservation could help out with? Or just a question, Glenn,
I,
could add, what is it?
I think that staff would be qualified to make sure that the project is done in accordance with the plans.
Yeah, it's qualified, but in terms of, time commitment. I know there's a few a year, but.
Or do you outsource that?
We do,
Outsource
yeah,
that,
we
like,
do.
So it's by a cost.
It would be, I don't know how significant it would be. I mean, because the inspectors are gonna be in there already.
Okay.
It would just have to be something where, for these specific projects. That we make everyone aware that they're looking for an extra layer on
Yeah,
top of their regular inspections. I don't, I have to think about it. I'm not ready to give a final answer, but I don't see it being a really significant added cost. I'm not seeing additional rounds of inspection.
To, okay, George makes a good point. When you talk to Lake Bluff, I don't, Hinsdale, that's something to make sure we hear what their experience was.
Well, and just to layer on that. If this were, I mean, it seems to me the goal is for there to be more of these landmarks, right? That's kind of,
I think so.
I'm hearing that in your presentation, so I'm not trying to trick you, but in a perfect world, right? More people pursue this. Then what does that have we created an incentive? And then what does that administrative burden look like when, people like me are like, oh, wait a second, I could have saved a lot of money on my project. The next time, I'm gonna go through this process and I'll become honorary or certified. And I'm gonna have all these benefits. I would like the staff to consider, what happens then as well, because in the one sense, that's a positive outcome. If you're measuring, houses being torn down or, beautiful homes being preserved. And again, I want to be clear, really in favor of that, but I just operationally wonder if it works.
Okay, so the one question relative to that, and Peter, you specified a figure in your presentation that related to the term is escaping me, the historically or architecturally significant properties. Would you anticipate that the honorary list or certified list could grow larger ever than that number?
The
Or
current
do you,
number?
yeah, do you think that list of architecturally significant properties? Admittedly, not all of those are, most of those are not certified or honorary.
Right.
Could that be potentially maybe not a ceiling, but pretty close to a ceiling? Or do you think that would require a kind of an architectural assessment that we'd have to do again to kind of generate, to make sure that that's the list?
Okay,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah, I do. I think
I may have changed cabs on you a couple times there, but what I'm trying to say is that generally as many as we think could be an honorary or a certified landmark in Glencoe?
Yeah.
Based off of what we know.
what's the upper limit?
Yeah.
We talked about the commission looking at the mid-century modern, so I would anticipate another 25.
Right.
Something in that world. And then what's really interesting is that you start to learn things when you start to look closer. So a gentleman came in to our meeting, was interested in potentially certifying his house. So I got on the computer and started looking at a little bit about his house, which led me down a path to, who is this architect anyway? Turns out he did some more work in Glencoe. So we need to learn a little more here. So 25 plus another 10, because there's a great example of a house. You would not even slow down when you go by it, but it's from the mid-century. It was an architect that built it for his family. He only lived in Glencoe for 2 or 3 years, and then he moved out to Silicon Valley and became quite the name out there. So this is one of his early works. Here, you look at him, really? But out there, he's kind of famous. So, huh. No one's ever heard of him here. But that doesn't mean it's not important.
Make a different point, which is just playing devil's advocate, and actually I almost feel funny saying it. So we're looking at all our residents, and with this particular incentive, is it fair to the people who are not living in architecturally significant homes that their wealthy friends who are living in architecturally significant homes are going to pay a lower fee for all these renovations? I mean, I agree that I want to offer carrots to people, but I wonder if this one, is one of those things that passes the equity fairness test, that we're only offering this to certain people. and not to others. And so I have a problem with that. I'd say if we want to rebalance our fees between new construction and renovation and don't have them so heavily, burdening the renovation person, that's fine with me. But the fact that we've got these two classes of groups that, I don't know, it's sounds like, could we be criticized for doing it this way? Anybody else? See?
Peter, what's your
Merit to that?
answer on that? I have one, I think, but what's your answer?
I could see where there are people that would have that perspective. I could see that.
Yeah.
Yet I don't. This is my feeling. I don't think it would be that many people that would have that perspective. But yes, you're gonna have some individuals who pound on the table, for sure. But when you take on a historic house, there is also a responsibility about it too, that you are maintaining it. Where any other house, you can just let it. Whatever. And so for that. I see a equalizer, if you will.
All right, let me say, I totally understand that point, and someone could feel that way. The idea, the preservation idea is there's somebody who is trying to decide whether to bulldoze their house or authorize the bulldozing of their house or do a remodeling that we would all prefer. And this is an encouragement to do the remodeling that we would all prefer. And if you're somebody that only wants to remodel, you can say, oh, it's not very fair because I'm just gonna remodel. But the Preservation Commission says, look around, a lot of people are bulldozing their houses, that's the best, the most financially worthwhile thing to do, particularly if you're planning on leaving town. And we're trying to discourage that. And not bulldozing your house does make a significant financial, you take a hit. If you don't get the most money for your house, you can't do what you want. So, but Gail's got a point. It wouldn't be, she's certainly right that it wouldn't be fair to do it if this was never gonna work. If it wasn't gonna actually affect anybody's behavior. So we have to look very hard as whether any of this, are people gonna be like Hillary, hey, I planned this whole thing. I'm gonna lose some money at the end, but it's
To Gail's
in
point,
the
my house
scheme,
isn't historic, so.
in the scheme of things, so we have to figure out whether it's gonna work. Because if it's not gonna work, then Gail's point becomes bigger. It's really unfair.
Yeah, I mean, I happen to be in favor of demolition fees and significant demolition fees. Because, and not that that's gonna stop anything either, but why not? We wanna discourage demolitions, that's really our biggest goal. And let's do that. I would also say that in terms of these fees that we have, whereas, the new construction fee is a per foot fee. If we're not gonna automatically increase it every year, we need to either have some sort of CPI index on that, or something more than that, or from Marshall Valuation Service or whatever. That should never stay at the level that it was the prior year, because we're increasing the renovation fees every year, because that's based on value. So I think that price per foot for the new construction needs to be pegged to something, so that there is an automatic increase. We know how much construction costs are increasing. So I would be in favor.
All right, well, that's a good point. But as I understand it, the fee we charge for a rebuild or a new construction, we're pretty far up there.
We
We're
should
far.
be, but
Which is-
our value.
Oh, no, I understand, and the question is, you'll, but Gail
And the
makes a
fee
good point.
still isn't gonna,
Right.
you know what, you wanna build new construction. They're gonna do it whether that fee is 8.25 or 8.50 or 8.75 or
all right.
9.50.
All right, well, look,
So,
and I like, we need the money.
I've always felt like fees was my
Okay,
area.
all right, so I think 1 and 2 were the same idea,
Yes,
but different execution and, okay, let's get more information on 1 and 2. I already talked about the zoning incentive, and I think, this zoning incentive is probably, just listening to everybody, this is probably something all of us would be willing to entertain, but it's complicated. And it could, and if we did it, in the event, it could fail because we have to respect the neighbors. And right now, the zoning protects the neighbors.
there was a question when this was presented 2 years ago about how do you do this? And what we're suggesting is that there's a two-step process, that the Preservation Commission review it for the architecture. And then the Preservation Commission would send their recommendations to the Zoning Commission. Excuse me. And then the Zoning Commission would run the process that they always run. And so they'd have neighbor comments and they'd be looking at setbacks and so on. And I'm okay with doing it further, but I would ask the question, how would you see us studying this further?
So the way I think about this is the Preservation Commission should be identifying historically and architecturally significant properties, and we should have a list. I guess there's a possibility when something comes up that, you could have a quick look if you thought something should be added. But we don't want to be surprising people, they're getting ready to do something and all of a sudden there needs to be a procedure if we're going to swoop in. The hard part is, okay, what is the zoning, the extra zoning variance that we would allow? I don't know exactly how you do that. It needs to be cabined.
Yeah, and could it be in terms of like FAR, but not side lot? Because sometimes I think, there is more room for density on a
Yeah.
lot, but maybe not encroaching.
The current proposal talks about an additional. Okay, the existing variances allow a gross floor area increase of up to 15%. This proposal on the paper right now is up to 30%. There was a whole series of diagrams I did to illustrate on various historic properties, what that might mean for an addition on the back of the house or the side of the house if there's no side yard setback. To move this forward, would you suggest that the head of zoning and I come back to you guys with just this issue and what we see as the opportunities? And
Sure. The answer is, the more information we have, better.
okay. I just want to have a
Yeah,
roadmap to
no,
go
I
forward, because I don't
yeah.
want to wait another 2 years. So if Scott and I get together, because the material's there, because we've reviewed it with them already, and they gave positive feedback. And said, I can't exactly remember what it was. But if we come back to this, then we'll come back to you all.
So the way zoning works is the village. So if that happened, okay, that'd be great. The village would then say, okay, we're looking at this. We could then send it to the zoning commission and they would make a recommendation that it would come back to the village and the village would change its ordinance. And the only thing I'm saying is, the answer is we should look, and I'm not saying that 30% instead of 15% for FAR in this unique circumstance wouldn't work. And you could sort of allow that, but in the real world, people have recently come to us to complain about something that was built next to them because this ginormous FAR was on top of them and they hate it.
Mhm.
So. Because it's allowed potentially as a variance, the zoning board would have the ability to say, yeah, we're not doing that. But again, it's just not simple.
Okay.
But,
No,
and we probably don't want a lot more height, because that would cause neighbors to go crazy. And we probably don't want a lot more side yard, because that would cause neighbors to go crazy. But if FAR would help. And the reason I think it's okay to consider this is because the zoning board does not have to say yes. They still could say no, because look, you're just trashing your neighbors, like. Okay,
So could I add something? Yeah, one of the things I think you're talking about is what I call mandatory referral to the preservation people. Preservation people report back to the zoning board. But you're exactly right, the zoning board can do a conditional approval.
well, I think that, I think.
Within certain, you might have certain guidelines, or maybe you want even something, or maybe you want to preserve a tree or something, I don't know.
So this is recommendation 4. The zoning board doesn't. They don't particularly do conditional approvals. I mean, they approve plans. And they grant variances for existing plans. But and this seems right. This is, I think, maybe Gail's point. If we're gonna grant any carrots, we have to be sure we are gonna get compliance on whatever the preservation issue is.
Taylor and I were mouthing to each other across the table, which isn't usually very effective. It's probably the best formal next step would be for the village board to refer this to the zoning commission for review. Probably refer it to both commissions together, have the zoning commission do a public hearing and bring back through that process the formal recommendations to the village board for ratification.
Speed it up.
This is probably gonna need to be done at the same time that we have another look at our criteria for zoning approvals.
Which we're
We can
gonna,
now do,
which we are gonna do.
because we're gonna have to target, we're gonna have to tailor those criteria to allow this, to allow the,
Right.
allow the, first of all, allow the Preservation Commission to weigh in on this formally, and then also
Okay.
to allow the ZBA to say, we're taking this into consideration.
All right, well,
Okay.
all right, so that seems smart. I'm embarrassed, I didn't think of it, glad our staff really did. Okay, so 5, demolition permit delay. And we could include in that Gail's idea of, okay, should we be charging more? I have to say, I am sympathetic to going to the 1 year, because that seems sort of, based on what I've seen, that's sort of consistent with what our neighbors are doing. It'd be, on behalf of Gary Rubin, nope, he's against that. And I don't know where the rest of the board is. Georgia,
Homeowner asked to be removed from their honorary landmark. Is that possible? Like the ones that
so
haven't exactly been involved in.
for certified, the answer is no.
Yeah, I'm an honor.
And for honorary, I think the answer is sort of no, but it doesn't, yeah. I mean, the question is, it doesn't have any teeth. And it seems to me it would defeat the purpose of what you guys are talking about, what the Preservation Commission is talking about. The question is, go ahead.
So what concerns me is we only have one example where the extra delay actually had a good solution and we saved the house. So we're looking at these other communities that have these longer time periods, but they don't seem to be solving the problem. I mean, they still are experiencing all these demolitions. And, you know, are we getting the result that we want, that we're gonna save homes? I mean, right now, we had the Booth House. That was because the Glencoe Historical Society got involved, but Now, how many houses out there are we really going to be able to save, or how many are saved in these other communities that have a 1 year time period? Or is it just an extra cost that the builder is building in, going, yeah, I'm gonna go rent it for a year because I know I can't, I can't tear that house down.
So that would be the Gary Rubin point. You're penalizing, you're gonna do something that's gonna cost the people money and it's not gonna work, so what are we bothered with it? I don't know the answer. And maybe it's worth it. Save one life, we've saved this one really important, potentially really important house renamed.
Right.
But I would absolutely entertain it, in part because it doesn't seem to me to be it's not free, but it doesn't seem to be a huge infringement on property rights. Same thing is true with having somebody talk to the Preservation Commission, okay. Which, moral suasion, whatever, look at somebody and say, how can you do this? It's a great house, and is that gonna work? I don't know, but it's not that horrible to make somebody go through it.
In my humble opinion, the last three don't infringe at all on property rights. Specifying the submission requirements, asking them to attend the meeting, and what's the third one? The demolition delay. In my opinion,
The
that
delay to
doesn't-
George's point, though, they didn't ask to be an honorary landmark.
Right.
So.
And they
it
can't
is-
get away
it is
from it.
infringement.
They are.
They didn't, they might not want to be an honorary landmark.
Well,
purchased the house, either they did it or they purchased the house.
If they purchase the house knowing it,
Knowing
that's
it.
different than it
Yes.
becomes an honorary landmark while they own it.
so Joe, being designated, I mean, it's not much of an infringement being designated, it's just people saying, okay, we would like to save this. That's public information. I mean, we're a government, and so maybe there's a little government thing in there, but anybody, a group of architects at a university could put up a list, and once we start saying, okay, you've been designated, and therefore you can't do this, or you have to wait a year. I mean, that's where Gary Rubin says, that year is costing, that's costing, that's costing. I mean, I'm okay with it, because it seems to me a modest, it is an infringement on property right, but it's modest and it might work, and I'd want to have, and we have an example in town where we saved the Frank Lloyd Wright building using the extra time.
Okay, but Frank Lloyd Wright, fine. Who gets to decide? Well, I mean, it's just to say Frank Lloyd Wright, that's an easy example, but there's a lot of historic or not historic homes in our community that, I think when we start talking about modifying code so that we can incorporate the views of a commission that's not elected, like all of that starts to make me feel uncomfortable. I appreciate the work that we have a shortage of volunteers in this town, and I appreciate when people commit their kind of time to these things, but it makes me really uncomfortable.
So
I went back and looked at history of the zoning code. And looked back at the history of the demolition. It started out as being a very modest amount of time, like 30 days. And then I think it went to 60 days. And now we're at 180 days. So there's been this pattern of elongating the demolition period. I put the Booth Cottage into this report because it was the most recent example. There have been other examples, but they go back some time. Some of the buildings on Scott, I believe. This stuff doesn't go happen fast.
So look, because we are about to turn into pumpkins, we have another meeting. Thank you for all this. I think that you've heard, okay.
Yeah.
There are varying views on the board. There are varying things that should be considered. I think the idea that we've come to that, okay, let's have the zoning commission and the Preservation Commission work together and make recommendations. And as you're doing it, think about what is going to get you 4 votes on the village board. And so I'm okay with a certain level of stick. There are my cohorts are less
Yeah.
okay with maybe the same level of stick. And then on carrot, people are potentially okay with it, but there has to be some kind of enforcement to be sure that your interest is served. And we need to know how much this is gonna cost us because we're not rolling in money.
Other than the zoning. Question, recommendation.
Yeah.
And the first ones that require. Some more research on the, from Lake Bluff and Hinsdale and so on. The other ones that are what I would call more process driven, about. With the requirements and then the attend a meeting. And the demolition delay. How do we move those forward?
I think it's the same thing. I mean, you're changing our. I mean, it's building code. Do we send to the building code to the zoning commission?
No. No.
Okay, so. What I would say is then if anything that would have to go to the zoning commission, which is our zoning, let's do that through the process we've talked about. And with the building stuff. I don't know that you have the votes for some of these. I'm more likely to entertain them than some of my cohorts, but make a pitch. And then there's no other way to do it than, make a pitch.
What's
And if
our
we have
timeline?
whatever you want it to be.
I'm just gonna suggest maybe we try to get back to the village board and another committee of the whole meeting with the staff research completed, tied back in with what the commission is talking about. Separate from the zoning stuff, which I think can operate on its kind of on a different plane, but I could see. Maybe the August committee of the whole.
Yeah.
Give us a few months.
That's pretty soon. Gary will get
That's
back.
what I wanted to also do is give it enough time to go to back to the Preservation Commission itself.
Yeah.
Before it comes back to the village board too.
By the way, we'll have a new trustee.
I won't be here.
So
That's why I had to do all my talking now. because this is-
Thank you, Gail.
I have no other opportunity.
Okay.
Yeah, the companies between them.
okay, so all right,
Thank you all.
Does that work?
thank you. We do take you. This is really complicated. It's really hard. Issues haven't gotten simpler over the last 35 years. So, but thank you for the hard work. We are actually paying attention and we do realize this math. Is there any other business? And if not, is there a motion to adjourn so we can run across the room and start our other meeting?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Motion carries. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.